Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Let me start with something uncomfortable. If you're still losing good fit deals, it's not because your targeting is off, it's because you don't understand power. And there isn't a lot of videos that talks about power, hidden veto and vendor terrain. And before you react, stay with me. We are almost 150,000 subscribers into this journey. That didn't happen because this is motivational or entertaining content. It's because serious operators are tired of polite marketing lies. If you have watched the first 5 episodes of Anti-Persona and you are still here, you're not average. The average marketers want better copy. The top 1% wants leverage. And today is where the split becomes brutal. Because posture explains when someone can buy, momentum explains when they might move, but politics explains why your deal dies quietly after 90 days and almost nobody tracks it. Here is what most marketing teams still believe: if the champion likes us, loves us, we are in. That belief has destroyed more pipeline than the bad product ever did. I learned this the hard way. We once had a 7-figure opportunity, posture aligned, budget confirmed, executive call went well, sales was already talking about expansion, and then procurement needed more time, and security asked for more questions, finance delayed, and then silence. 3 weeks later we get a response that they have decided to stay with the incumbent. The incumbent wasn't better, they were embedded. And we never mapped who would lose power if we won, and that's the mistake. You think you are competing against another vendor, you're competing against internal stability, you're competing against someone's political safety. And if your solution increases internal risk, even if it increases ROI, it kind of dies. Let me repeat this for you. If your solution increases internal risk, even if it increases ROI, it dies. And that's not a theory, that's how real buying decisions happen. And here is the part that separates amateurs from operators. If you cannot answer this question in under 60 seconds, who inside your account benefits if nothing changes, then you're not running a system, you're running hope. Right? And hope does not scale, right? The episode is not about better messaging. It's about understanding vendor terrain, hidden veto power, and internal risk distribution. Because the person who kills your deal is rarely the person you pitch. And once you see this layer, you cannot unsee it. Let me break down what actually happened in the 7-figure deal, right? Because this is where most marketers lie to themselves, right? Our champion loved us, they were pushing internally, they even told us that you are the front runner. That sentence should scare you. Front runner is what people say when they don't control the finish line. We assumed alignment meant inevitability. It didn't. And here is what we didn't see. The incumbent vendor had been there for 5 years, 5 years of integration, 5 years of security approvals, 5 years of internal relationship, right? And replacing them wasn't just a software decision, it was a political event. And political events create casualties, right? If we won, someone's past decision would look wrong. If we won, someone's internal influence would shrink. And if we won, someone would have to explain risks to the board, and nobody wants to volunteer for that. So what happens, right? Nobody says no, they just slow you down. Procurement needs more documentation, security wants additional review, finance needs clarity on the total cost, legal needs to evaluate risk. None of those objections are about your product, they are about political safety. That's the mistake 99% of the GTM teams make. They treat friction as operational when it's actually political. And if you treat political friction like a feature gap, you will keep sending follow-up to a deal that already died. And let me ask you something uncomfortable. How many times has this happened to you, right? Everything feels aligned, momentum is strong, feature looks healthy, then the deal just fades. No dramatic rejection, no clear loss, just evaporates, right? This is not bad selling, that's unmapped power, right? And here is the deeper problem. Most marketing teams don't even measure entrenchment, right? They measure fit, engagement, intent, MQL score, but they never ask How deep is the incumbent embedded? Who inside the company would lose status if we win? Who owns risk versus who owns budget? Who signs and who silently blocks? You cannot out-message entrenchment, you cannot out-content politics, and you cannot out-sequence internal fear. This is why posture and momentum are not enough, because buying isn't just economic, it is political. And if you don't see the battlefield, you're walking into a fortress thinking it's an open field. In the next section, I'm going to show you something most CMOs never map: vendor terrain. And once you see it, you will never misread a strong pipeline the same way again. Let me make this practical, right? Every account you pursue sits in one of the three terrains, not industries, not segments, not ICP buckets, terrains. And if you don't identify the terrain before you engage, you are guessing. And here they are. First one is greenfield: no real incumbent, no deeply embedded systems, no political baggage. These deals move fast generally. There is curiosity, there is openness, the risk of change is low, and marketing teams love these accounts because velocity feels high. Greenfield is rare at scale. Most mature companies are not greenfield, which brings us to the second terrain: partial entrenchment. There is an incumbent, but dissatisfaction exists. The system works, but imperfectly. People complain quietly. Leadership question ROI occasionally. This is where most good fit accounts actually live. And this terrain is deceptive because your champion may genuinely want change, but change requires political capital. Someone must defend the decision, someone must take the responsibility, and someone must explain disruption. If your champion doesn't have that capital, you lose, even if your solution is objectively better. That brings us to the third: fortress. This is where most deals die. Long-term vendor relationship, deep integrations, board level visibility, internal ownership tied to past decisions. Right? Replacing the incumbent here is not a feature comparison, it's a threat to internal credibility. And if you walk into a fortress and sell like it's a greenfield, you will burn budget and time, and then you will blame messaging. And here is the uncomfortable question: before your last major outreach push, did you classify terrain, or did you just classify fit? Right? Because fit tells you who could buy, terrain tells you how hard the internal resistance will be, and resistance predicts cycle length more accurately than persona ever will. And let me give you an idea that might change how you forecast. Pipeline velocity is not determined by deal size, it is determined by entrenchment depth. You can have a smaller deal in greenfield move faster than a larger perfect ICP inside a fortress. You understand what I'm saying? Yet most dashboards track ARR potential, not terrain. And then leadership wonders why forecasting feels like fiction, theater. Now here is where this gets dangerous. If you don't adjust your strategy by terrain, you end up doing one of the three things. You oversell in greenfield, you undersupport in partial entrenchment, and completely misread fortress resistance as lack of urgency. And that misread is expensive. In the next section, we'll go one layer deeper, because terrain explains structure, but power explains outcome. And the person who blocks your deal is usually invisible in your CRM. And let's talk about hidden veto power. Here is something most marketing team never admit: the person who kills your deal is rarely the person you present to, and they are almost never in your CRM notes. We love mapping decision makers, economic buyers, technical buyers, champions, influencers. It looks clean, it looks organized, it looks strategic. But real buying decisions don't die in demo, they die in side conversations. Let me show you how this actually plays out. You have a strong champion, they love your solutions, they see the upside, they want the win. But somewhere inside the organization, there is someone who feels exposed by change. Maybe it's the head of IT who approved the incumbent vendor 5 years ago. Maybe it's the security lead who doesn't want additional compliance risk. Maybe it's procurement whose KPI is cost containment and not innovation. Maybe it's finance protecting budget optics before a board meeting. That person does not argue with you. They don't attend your demo. They don't ask hard questions on your Zoom or Teams call. They just slow the deal down. They introduce friction. They expand review cycles. They create more diligence, and friction feels operational, but it's actually political. That's the difference between amateur and elite GTM. Amateurs ask, do we have a champion? Elites ask, who loses power if we win? And that's the question, because buying decisions redistribute influence. If your product increases someone's internal risk, even if it improves ROI, you have created resistance. And resistance rarely announces itself. It manifests as procurement review extensions, security escalations, legal red lines, budget reprioritization, leadership needing alignment. You think you are in a late stage negotiation, you are actually in a political and survival mode. Here the idea most marketers aren't ready for is that your deals didn't stall, it was vetoed quietly. And if you never identified who had veto leverage, you were forecasting fiction. And let me ask you something directly. When was the last time you mapped who owns budget, who owns risk, who owns reputation, and who owns status quo? Because these are 4 different people, and the one who owns risk usually has more power than the one who owns budget. That's why CFO changes kill deals. That's why CTO transitions freeze initiatives, and that's why compliance tightening reshapes pipeline overnight. Politics is not drama, it's resource control. And if your anti-persona system doesn't account for that layer, you are solving half the equation. In the next section, I'll show you how to map this power before you invest time, because once you see veto dynamics early, you stop chasing impossible deals, and that alone changes revenue predictability. Let's make this uncomfortable but actionable, right? Before your next tier 1 account push, I want you to answer 5 questions. Not in a deck, not in a CRM field, on paper. Because if you can't answer them in 3 minutes, you are not ready to pursue the deal. Question number 1, who benefits if nothing changes? This is the most important question in the entire episode. Not who benefits if you win. Who benefits if the incumbent stays? Because stability is a benefit. Political safety is a benefit. Avoiding disruption is a benefit. If someone senior benefits from stability, you're walking into resistance, and resistance has weight. Question number 2, who owns risk versus who owns budget? These are not the same person. Budget owners approve spend, risk owners approve exposure, and risk owners usually have veto leverage. If your champion controls budget but not risk, your deal is already fragile. Question number 3, what happens internally if your solution fails? This is rarely discussed. If implementation goes wrong, who looks incompetent? If ROI takes longer than promised, who absorbs the blame? The higher the internal operation risk, the stronger the hidden resistance. Question number 4, how embedded is the incumbent? Are they lightly integrated, operationally integrated, or strategically embedded? The deeper the integration, the higher the political cost of replacement, and you cannot treat a fortress like a greenfield. That brings us to the question number 5. Does your champion have political capital? Enthusiasm is not capital. Title is not capital. Influence is capital, right? Have they driven change before? Have they won internal battles? Or are they optimistic but powerless? If they don't have internal leverage, you are building forecast on sand. And here is what most teams do instead. They celebrate engagement, they celebrate demo attendance, they celebrate positive feedback. None of that measures power. You can have high engagement in a politically impossible deal, and you can have low engagement in a greenfield that will move fast once triggered. That's why your pipeline feels inconsistent, because you're measuring noise, not leverage. And let me give you a hard truth. If you cannot map the internal power structure of your top 20 accounts, your forecast is fiction. You're presenting probability without political context. And boards don't say this out loud, but they feel it. They feel when pipeline lacks gravity. And in the section, we tie this back to anti-persona system and why this layer turns targeting into true operating reality. Because once you combine posture, momentum, terrain and power, you stop chasing, you start predicting, you start producing. Let's zoom out for a second. Look at what we have built across this series. We killed personas. We replaced static ICP with posture. We introduced momentum. We built a weekly operating rhythm. And today we added politics. Now ask yourself honestly, how many marketing teams in your industry are operating at this level? Most are still arguing about messaging angles. Most are still debating about headline tests. Most are still refreshing personas every 12 months and calling it a strategy. But real revenue movement doesn't happen at the messaging layer. It happens at the alignment layer. When posture, momentum, terrain and power align, deals move fast. When even one of those layers misalign, deals stall quietly. That's the difference between noise and inevitability. Let me say something that might challenge you. If your forecast depends on persuasion alone, you don't have leverage. If your win rate depends on how strong the pitch was, you don't have a system. Elite teams don't rely on persuasion, they rely on context. They don't try to convince fortress accounts to change. They wait for posture shifts. They don't treat every engaged account equally. They rank by terrain and veto density. They don't chase enthusiasm, they validate political capital, and that's the shift. Anti-persona was never about targeting. It was about replacing fiction with operating reality. Operating reality means understanding investment posture, tracking momentum signals, classifying vendor terrain, mapping power distribution. When you combine these four, something interesting happens, right? Your pipeline stops feeling chaotic, you stop being surprised, you stop asking why did this stall, because you saw the stall before it happened. And that is what separates the top 1%, not intelligence, not creativity. Clarity about how organizations actually move, how they protect themselves. If you can read that, you don't just improve marketing, you improve predictability, and predictability is what CEOs actually care about. If you have watched this far, you already know something most marketing teams don't. Buying decisions are not linear, they are political, they are contextual, they are defensive, and they are rarely about your feature set. We are almost 150,000 operators into this conversation, and that number matters, not because it's big, but because it signals something. There is a growing group of CEOs and serious GTM leaders who are done pretending the old playbook works. They don't want more leads, they want fewer surprises, they don't want more dashboards, they want clearer forecasts. They don't want louder messaging, they want stronger leverage. And that's what this series is building. Not tactics, leverage. Leverage over timing, leverage over internal resources, leverage over political risk. Because once you understand power dynamics inside an account, you stop selling like a vendor, you start operating like an insider. And insiders win more than they lose. And let me leave you with one idea. If you cannot map who benefits from the status quo, you're not competing against a vendor, you're competing against stability. And stability usually wins. I hope you found this series helpful, especially this episode, because nobody talks about power, vendor terrain, and internal dynamics. Thank you so much for watching this series. Until next time, cheers.